In this episode, we're speaking with Daniel Plunkett, publisher of the ND fanzine and label based in Austin, Texas. I'm Martin Franklin, and I corresponded with Daniel during the early 90s. With Contact, Exchange, Document as the fanzine's tagline, Dan's projects have always been about growing connections with artists from around the world. This is Cassette Culture.
They were called friendship books. So these books would travel around and you would mail it to a friend and you would put interests. And I started getting letters and I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. I forgot how I got into it. I just bought a record like Throbbing Gristle back in the day, and they had like this contact sheets and you could write them. And there were all these kind of things going around in like different bands. And anyway, it was just kind of fascinating to me. Like, oh, there's a guy that lives in Sheffield and I'll write him. And so that's kind of how it started. I was just into finding contacts.
Can you just explain a little bit more about the friendship book idea? It's not something I've ever come across before.
So what it would be somebody would make like a little booklet, like you could fit in the envelope, and it would have like 20 pages in it, and it would be blank, and you would just fill out the next blank page, like put your address, and you would write kind of your interests. Like, I like Crawford, I'd like to have friends from whatever. Yeah. And it started from the Bay City Rollers because it was like a worldwide network of all these teens that, wanted to get connections. And I just kind of tapped into that, like, oh, there's this whole network I can find, So I had a friend from Iceland, and that's how I got started.
That's amazing. You've slightly blown my mind there. I definitely did not expect the words Bay City Rollers to be coming out of your mouth.
I just kind of wheeled it my way. And then I would just find these, how we did back in the day. Somebody would refer you to somebody else, like he runs a tape label or that kind of stuff. It was just like this kind of worldwide network, which mirrored kind of what was going on with mail art, cassette culture. They were all kind of these things that, intertwined. And
you obviously decided to kind of take that concept and evolve it, right, into your own publication.
So yeah, the first thing, it was basically just a kind of means when I first started was just going to be, I think it was another friend. It was just like contacts exchanged. Like, let's find out who everybody is and exchange addresses. And so instead of a contact sheet, it'd be like, oh, well, let's have like a little bit more in it so people can let's do some documentation. Like, let's have interviews and let's do reviews and just kind of be more informational. And that's kind of where it came from. One of my early pen pals who I reconnected with, he was from Liverpool, Phillip Johnson. He was really prolific and did these wonderful cassettes, and he did a record and it got reissued. But there'd be these characters like that, like they would just be remote. And I thought, man, it's just no one knows about this artist. And so I felt it was like an obligation, people should know about this person, But he was also really good friends with Marky Smith of The Fall.
Oh, yeah?
Because I was a huge Fall fan. So I saw him in Dallas and went to Austin and went to Houston. This was in the late 70s. And Phillip wrote Marky Smith a lot. So my introduction, I went backstage. I go, you're a friend of Phillip Johnson. He goes, oh, yeah, he writes long letters, doesn't he? I go, yeah. So we bonded. I got to visit with The Fall,
Yeah.
And before every show, he would play a snippet of a Phillip Johnson cassette. And I go, wow, how amazing is that? Because it's just kind of distorted, and nobody knew who he was. But I was like, that's pretty great. So there's this weird connection.
And so when I'm through, and I've done what I had to do, I have a wash, put the clothes on, haven't made sure that the smell's all gone. I feel ashamed to think of it. I wish I could just be sick, relieve myself by vomit in the bathroom sink. And later, when my mum gets home and she asks me how I've been, I'll just say, oh, all right. I've said so many times, I won't even think. But I wanted to do it, I know I did. I wanted to do it, I know I did. I wanted to do it, I wanted to...
Anyway, just these weird characters. Like, how did you put these records out and no one's buying them? You know,
Yeah.
It's fascinating. You know, when artists would come over here, there was a network of people like in the States, so that would help put on shows. Like we would do, like when Franz Devard came over with Bee Queen. You know, sure, we'll set up some shows here, and he went to Philadelphia. There was another guy that did shows, so. They could just, you know, it's more like you're not really going to make money, but you'll have fun, you know, that kind of thing. So,
back in episode 4, we spoke with Franz de Waard about his vital fanzine and music projects. During that interview, he talked to us about discovering email for the first time on one of his trips to the USA. So I'm thinking this story that Dan just told us is the moment that Franz talks about.
Yeah, I think in 1993, I was in America for the first time in my life. We came to a guy's house and said, I'm going to check my email. I had no idea what he was talking about. And maybe 2 years later, in 1995, World Wide Web became a word that people from Stapel were talking about. But of course, then we had email.
How did you actually physically make the magazine at that time?
Yeah, in the early days, it was like, you know, the first few was like a Commodore 64 or a typewriter, or going to the copy shop and doing some letter set, you know, just as much as you could get done within a cheap way. And yeah, it was all hands-on, just kind of make a pot of coffee and lay it out and listen to weird records and, you know. And there'd always be somebody to help, like, oh, I'll help you lay this out and things like that. But at first it was all just all done by hand.
So when you say do the layout, practically, how did you have to do that?
Just glue sticks, you know, typing columns. Like on, I think the first few was just typewriters. So a lot of going back and forth to fix the edits, and then shrink it down on the Xerox machine to fit, and then just physically lay it out so you could take it to the printer, and they would just, you know, make 500 copies or whatever. I mean, each one got better. You learn more and more, like, oh, this is how you do it. But it's all you know, it's like zines. Like you just learn from different people. Like, oh, how did you get that to look so good? Like, oh, do a Velox. It's like, oh, what's that? You know, things like just kind of practical stuff that you just kind of learn on your own.
As a sign of things to come, ND released both audio and video editions of the fanzine, encompassing tape letters and field recordings that were being exchanged by artists in the mail art scene. So can you tell me about the cassette issue first?
So it was ND7, and we thought, oh, let's do a cassette issue. And we're going to reach out to performance artists, male artists, and artists that we like. You know, we got a wide range. And so it was really successful. It was like, oh, we got a really good mix, you know. And I still listen to some of his.
How did the male artists approach sound as a format?
They did like sound poetry, or there was kind of like stream of kind of Burroughs-ish kind of stuff, or they would just do God, what's his name? There was a lot of kind of tape letter stuff back in the day, so you'd hear incidental things or people making a monologue. And I think back to the day, like, what's his name? Ad Bowman?
Oh, yeah.
He would do these tapes where like he'd be just on the train and just making a tape letter. He's just talking. And for me, it was fascinating because I'm like, oh, I never had been on a train. So I'm just like, oh, wow, that sounds awesome.
N.D. P.O. Box 4144, Austin, Texas 78765.
It's 2:27 p.m. Berlin.
Nächster Bahnhof Siemensdamm.
Yeah, it's 6 to 6 now here.
So we thought, well, this would be easy. We should do a video issue. Well, we just weren't set up for it. And we realized, it took some mastering and you got to edit. You need things like that. And Michael Northam was the one when he moved down. He goes, I'll take it all with me and I'll do it. I was like, oh, that'll be fantastic. So then we had our masters, then we duplicated it. And they weren't that expensive, but we had to do I think 50 at a time. And they were kind of pricey. So we never ended up doing a lot of them. And they're kind of bulky to mail.
Yeah. And what kind of tape format were you duplicating them on?
A VHS. So and also then the problem became too, you really couldn't send it to somebody in the UK because they have a different system, or Japan, it's all US.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But it was kind of fun to do. And it was just, again, it was kind of like mail artists, musicians, visual artists, all kind of submitted stuff. Lon Spiegelman, he's a famous mail artist from LA, and different people. I'm glad that was captured.
Howdy, welcome to the Indy 11 video issue.
There's the bullet hole. Some guy got it. I don't know if it got him. Went in here, looks like an entry and an exit. But this is my greatest piece of mail art, or my most unusual. It was mailed through the mail, went to Cedar Falls, Iowa, German World War I helmet, has 10, 20, 36 cents worth of stamps on it, and it went through the mail like that. World War I, can you believe it? Isn't that a trip?
After building up a network of artists through the mail, the next step for ND was to build out its international distribution network for the fanzine.
There were different little spots that would do zines. There was See Here in New York, which is the famous one. And they would distribute all different press. And you would write other magazines like, hey, who's distributing you? Like, oh, you should write Artware in Germany. She distributes. So you would just kind of build up this distribution network. And also postage wasn't as expensive as it is now. Now it'd be prohibitive. But you could mail 10 copies to London, for whatever, $5 or $10, and you kind of made your money back. And then in turn, somebody would see it there and pick it up, and they would write you, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, here's somebody else, and, I like what you're doing, you should contact this person, that kind of thing. So, yeah, you did pretty good. Anomalous is real important, Solemn Moon, because they were mail order, but they'd all start doing distributing. And so you would like, oh, well, they're going to take 25 copies, and you could increase your press run. And then I think it was later on, I forgot what issue, but we were in the teens, and then Tower Records started picking it up. And they would call up and go, well, we want 1,000 copies. And I was like, oh, my God. Okay, well, we were just never professional. It was me and some friends, and just, we tried to make a go at it. Well, we did this cassette show at the museum here. I forgot what year that was. It's called Undercurrents. We sent these invitations, and we were trying to expose like the cassette network, you know. And it was just like, I would go to the post office, there'd be like 150 packages and letters. And it was just like, I felt, it was like Santa Claus, but also at the same, we were real naive when we started. We're like, oh, this will be, I have a pretty good idea how it started. Like back in the day, I wrote like Deleted Fun Time, some of the early like UK, I had a sort of feel on the cassette culture, I thought. And then a lot of people I knew. And when we kind of started unearthing it, it's like, this is so much more massive than I ever thought. Like there's 60 cassette labels in Brazil. Like this is so incredible. But it was also daunting because we didn't have the capability to handle it. It was just like
suddenly all this sort of huge network has it kind of turned its focus a little bit on you and is saying, hey, here's some more stuff from us.
It's like a tumbleweed. And so I remember we used to review, because it came from the mail art aesthetic, like if you sent something to a show, everything got submitted, got shown. There's no curation. It's just open, show it, get it. And so when we got cassettes or whatever, we would mention everything we got, like even a poetry zine or whatever. But then it became this massive thing where everybody was like, oh, I'm going to send this for review. And it's like, how do we review 400 cassette tapes? You know, and we had different people review, and there was no room in the, so we started having to like, well, we'll just review one of the cassettes they sent in, because they just sent all 20 of their releases and things like, it just became this bigger than you could handle. And then, you had to start curating somehow or you would just get smothered.
Now with a network of distribution in place, ND launched as a label in its own right. Running from between 1989 to 1996, the label released 5 albums on cassette, followed by CD and vinyl releases of music by artists including Jeff Greinke, Vidna Obmana, PBK, and Maeror Tri. So that sort of organically grew out into, well, we're gonna produce our own releases.
Yeah, because it was artists like, I remember like PBK, Vidna Obmana, like we get their tapes and I really personally loved it, but they were putting out cassettes, but I thought, oh, maybe we can do something with this because you're not really getting a CD out. We could do that. It's not that expensive. And so, especially in those early days, it was like everybody was buying stuff like crazy, you know, so, and they were cheap to mail. It just seemed like back then you could put out a CD of 500 copies and just sell it all. No matter, there were just people that were so hungry, like, oh, here's a new weird noise thing. Like, okay, cool. And back in the day too, when we first started doing CDs, like the first 3 or 4, I remember we did like, it was PBK and Vidna Obmana, and Stahlplow would call. Like, I don't know, they would think it was Franz. It was somebody, maybe it was Franz, but he would call and he goes, send us 50 more. I was like, okay, cool. And we were selling them cheap. Like, we were selling them for $6. We just wanted to get them out. And I was like, oh man, this could help fund the magazine, because now we can sell 500 CDs. And the first 3 or 4 worked like magic. And then the other ones, we kind of committed to other ones. And it's like, okay, this is harder to sell. This is not going to work. I mean, it's not really well known. Like, some people found it, and we would get comments and like all these stories. Like, of course, some people aren't here anymore. And they go, oh, it's so great that I can see it. That was my dad. And I was like, oh, God. Like, I really, because you have fond memories of these people that you knew for 1 or 2 years. Like, yeah, he was a really good kind of filmmaker. Or Leah Singer's on there back in the day. She did like Pixel Vision. Well, Leah Singer's now married to Leah Ronaldo from Sonic Youth, but I've always known her from those days. And so all these people that those connections are still there. You know, you're like, oh, I still remember you as that girl that did Pixel Vision because it was so cool. You know, different things. So there's, you know, it's bittersweet. And sometimes when I look at them, it's like, oh, I wish we had done that a little bit better, but I'm glad it's out there, you know.
In this episode, you heard the voices of Daniel Plunkett and Franz de Waard. Music was by Phillip Johnson from the album Heartache's Worst Assistants versus the Genius with the Secret of Making Gold into Dynamite. Performance in the Staircase by Alpunk Fix from ND7. Lon Spiegelman from ND11, the video issue. Psychotic by Die Form. Desiderium by Maeror Tri from the Mayan CD, and Jeff Greinke from Fragment 01.